Everybody, it's nice to see you all here, and we have two presenters. I'm the one wearing the microphone, and my name is Johanna Tuñón, and we have Laura Ramirez here, but I caught her with her mouth full, so she just is going to wave and look pretty. This session is focused on APA, but from a perspective of the faculty person, and not so much the mechanics of how to do the session, but more the kinds of questions that you need to think about as you're working with your students on how picky you want to be in implementing it or not so picky. And I have a PowerPoint slide presentation, since we may still have is anybody joining us yet? We do have somebody? Oops. Because I want to be sure that the people who are logging in virtually will be able to get the content that is, part of the regular planned presentation. And then afterwards, what we'll do is take time to answer individual questions. So rather than do what I normally would do, is sort of ask you what you want to get out of the session, and then gear it more towards let the questions drive the presentation. We'll start with the presentation and then take time for questions afterwards. All right, so let's make sure I know how to navigate here. If you were, I guess I'd like to have you think to yourself, whether we're here in the room, we can do it by a show of hands. How many of you require your students to follow APA formatting rules? Okay. And do you give your students any guidelines on how to format resources, specific ones? Do you point them to anything, or you just say, use the book? Okay. I just, want to that as a starting point. So let's take a standard journal citation like this one, where you have it follows the basic format that APA has been using at least since the 5th edition, with the authors, the date of publication, the title of the article, the title of the journal, the volume number, the page numbers. That's just a plain old APA citation. One of the things they added in the 6th edition, and sort of in that interim period before the 6th edition, was starting to use a DOI number. How many times do you actually see your students use DOI numbers? Sometimes? Yeah. And the funny thing is that if you look at what they have, what they use, if they cut and paste from the actual journal, the journals don't have that APA or that DOI number formatted correctly according to APA rules. For example, that DOI is supposed to be lowercase in the colon and then no space after it and no period at the end. But a lot of times I see it actually in the journal publication with the DOI in caps and a space after the colon. So, I tell them to copy and paste it, but, the problem is they don't always know what's intended by that. And APA's got these weird rules when it comes to in the 6th edition of what should be included in a journal citation if it was retrieved electronically. So the DOI number is always the default, but then they'd say, and Laura and I actually called the editors before the book came out and argued, passionately that this was a dumb rule, but they of course didn't pay attention to us. The way it states in the 6th edition is if they retrieved it, let's say from a library database, they're not supposed to any longer use the the name of the database, especially standard databases like PsycInfo or ERIC, where that journal may be retrieved one place or another place. You're supposed to put the journal home URL. Students didn't go to the home URL. They went to maybe a database, maybe they went through the library's journal finder option. Whatever they did, chances are they didn't go here because they would have had to pay if they came in through the association site if they weren't members. So why the APA made that a requirement? Well, the thinking was that way students or whoever was trying to get hold of the document would know where it came from and could go through whatever hoops they needed to get it. But that's the rationale. So, but students have a hard time with that. And then you've got the whole issue of that APA then got so many questions that they have started a blog. Has anybody seen the APA style blog? Okay, extra points. They actually started a blog, maybe a year and a half ago or so, and they have a posting in there that answers the question about when to use the full URL or when to use the journal home page URL. But that's not really obvious to students. And then you've also got the whole issue, let's see if I, is if students try to use the cite tools that databases offer, like in ProQuest they have cited, cite this, isn't it, worded, and it's worded a little bit differently in other databases. But this is what this particular database, ProQuest, how they would have formatted the citation. Yeah, they have the whole first part correct, the authors, the date, the title of the article, the name of the journal, blah, blah, blah. But then they have this retrieve from and this whole gobbledygook thing. That's not APA, but that's what the database is telling the students is a correct format. If they actually look in there, sometimes the DOI number is embedded in there, but that still doesn't help them. And then you also have different academic programs have different rules within here at the university, and Fischler is a case in point. For those of you who work with, and we got several Fischler people here, I can see. Hi, Dio. Fischler, when it comes for final review for the dissertations, they do not care really whether the student has a retrieval statement or not. As long as they have that basic citation through the page number, period, that's all they care about, if the student's consistent. But do they tell the student you don't have to have it? No. There's no communication to the student of what the expectation is. And so students a lot of times call the library and say, I'm getting points off for doing it this way or that way, and sometimes the professor wants it this way, sometimes the professor wants it that way, and why can't they all be consistent, and so they get kind of frustrated. And I'm not saying there's a right, well, there's what APA says, and then there's what the university makes a decision on how they want to implement something in your specific academic center. But I'm just pointing out some of the challenges the students have when trying to follow APA rules, because it's easy to say you follow APA to the letter. Trying to follow it to the letter sometimes can be kind of challenging, and this is just one of those cases in point. Okay, so if we move on, oh, I don't have to use that. In the case of what the APA blogs had recommended, they said basically if there was a proprietary information and you had to have the password, maybe a membership in an association, IEEE, ACM, ASHA, those kinds of organizations, and to get to the journals in that organization, you've got to have a membership. They say, don't worry about getting down and providing a link to the journal. Just give a link to the home page, and that gives the student enough information to be able to ferret out whatever they need later. So in most cases, this will be sufficient for what the students need just to follow APA rules. Okay, but then there are all kinds of other things that can throw students for a loop. One of the things that you're starting to see in the databases that we subscribe to are the actual digital version of the article is becoming available much sooner than the print version. So, for example, when I did a search for this particular, whatever topic I did, the first 3 journals are listed as being published in October 2012. And I downloaded those a month ago. So a good 10 months before the article is technically published, the full text of the article is already available in a digital format. Now, APA has this convoluted rule about the archival copy of the article, or the what they call article of record. Now, what they mean by that is when the article gets published, thinking old-fashioned print publishing, and it's on paper in the journal, you know, it's not going to get changed anymore, right? That's the final version. But when you've got versions of an article that are now being released online, and it's purported to be the last version, but it's 10 months before the print version comes out, we don't know for sure whether it's the final version or whether it may be still if there's some mistakes or updates, that they could tweak it, and it could be, you know, that the print version and the digital version at one point between now and the, 10 months from now could change. And the rule for APA is if the article, if it's not the final archival article of record, then you're supposed to put the retrieval date. But if it's the final version, you don't need the retrieval date. That seems straightforward, except how do you know when it's the final version or not? And in books the same way. If you go and look at a dictionary on the shelf, that's the final version. But you look at a dictionary online, and they may change the definition as time goes forward. And so you would have to, as a person thinking about it and knowing that that resource could change, should put the retrieval date. But how do students know? You know, they're not going to know. But that's one of those rules that they struggle with. Or if you've got very dedicated anal students who are paying attention to all the little details, these are the kinds of things they come to us and ask about. Then there are the students who don't care and just throw something on the page, and yeah, they don't worry about, those students don't worry about these kind of details. Another issue with APA that I think Laura and I would both agree is an absolutely stupid rule is, you notice that we're not complete fans of APA formatting, is you know that you've got the pagination for the volume number and the issue number. And APA says if the pagination is continuous through the volume, you don't put the issue number, because you can tell by the page numbers, where to find it, which issue's in. That's true for print versions where the student came into the library and pulled it off the shelf, and they could see, they could just look and see, well, page 1 in volume, in issue 1, and it runs consecutively through issue 4 to, let's say, 567. The pages just ran continuously through the entire volume. Other journals, every issue starts with page 1. When that happens, you do need the issue number to be able to locate the item. So the APA has this rule based on arcane, old-fashioned, out-of-date perceptions of what, how publishing is done and how students access information. So let's say we have this particular journal article, and their student is looking at, what to put. They will either put the issue number or not the issue number. They have to do extra research if they retrieve it online, because all they've got is the actual article. They don't know what came before it. They don't know what the pagination is for the rest of the articles going after that. Not only that, the faculty who might be having to track down that information, if the student doesn't put the issue number down in there, you're going to have a harder time finding it, because when you go into the databases, the way we show it on the page, you need to know the year, the volume number, the issue number. You go to the table of contents and you find the article. If you don't have the issue number, and APA says don't put it there except in specific circumstances, it makes it actually more difficult for the end user. So I don't know what all the academic centers say, but I know that in Fischler, since I'm a dissertation chair there, so I get stuck learning all their special rules, is as long as the student is consistent, and if they always put the issue number down or they always follow the APA rule, that's fine. But don't just do it sometimes this way, sometimes that way for no apparent reason. There's, you should be consistent. My suggestion to you guys is if you don't have a strong feeling about it one way or the other, go ahead and ask your students just, if they ask, it's just to always put in the issue number, because it really will help other people be able to locate the document more easily, even though APA has this rule about continuous pagination or pagination by issue. Does that make sense, or do you? Okay. I figure most of you are already, if you're here, it's that you care. I'm so used to pushing the. And the APA blog does have a posting about this. How to determine whether a periodical is paginated by issue or not. So people have actually posted this question and raised this issue, and they said, we don't care, go in and go online and try to figure out what the pagination is so you can follow our rule, slavishly. I'm just telling you what, how they look at following APA, what that entails. And this is actually, if the student were trying to look at it, locate it, or you were trying to locate that article online, if you went to our list of journals, this one is reading and writing. And you'll see how they're organized here, where you don't have the page number. The page number isn't helping you identify which of these links to go into. You need the volume and issue number to actually be able to figure out where to go. Or you start doing hunt and peck. Well, let me try this one. This looks approximately right. Let me try that one until you find the right link to drill down and find the actual article. So there's a little bit of a disconnect between what APA asks for and what's necessarily useful for you guys in the classroom. All right, so moving on over to books. I have to say their rules for books is another one of those things that I find a personal irritation. I know. Maybe this is my pet peeves on APA. And they have a blog website for that too. How do you cite an ebook? And basically, for a print book, you had the author, the date, the title of the book, the location of the publisher, and then the name of the publisher. That's the old standard format. For ebooks, they say you provide one of the three, not combinations, one of the three. The location and publisher, the old information, but a lot of times if you go into an ebook, you know it's from Wiley, but you don't know where Wiley is located. Sometimes, or you use the DOI number, and books now have DOI numbers sometimes. Encyclopedia articles have DOI numbers. More and more things are assigned DOI numbers. Or you put, again, that format with the retrieval statement and the publisher's home URL. So if it's Wiley or Springer or whatever, you would put their URL. Yeah? They can post it online. Yeah, and APA does have some rules on how to format things that are not published and are not really accessible, in terms of, because if it's in Blackboard, it's not accessible to the world. It's not findable like Google or something. So if it's in your Blackboard class, but it's not just a website, then there's a specific rule, and Laura can go ahead and look that up. So we'll come back to that question after the session. And for the people who are listening online, the question was, how does a student cite something the professor posted in a class, in Blackboard or WebCT or whatever? And we'll come back and talk about that a little bit later. But anyway, so for the books, you've got three methods that you can choose to provide. You have the author, the date, the title of the book, and then that other information that gets included. So let's say we have this book, Security Planning and Disaster Recovery. It could say New York, New York, McGraw-Hill, or it could have the DOI number, or it could have retrieved from McGraw-Hill, ... whatever. Any thoughts about these three formats? It doesn't matter. They said the retrieval statement isn't where they got it. The retrieval is the journal, the publisher, home URL. Same way with the journal. They did retrieve the journal from the database. They retrieved it. They're supposed to put the journal home URL. So that, and that almost makes the student feel like they're lying because they retrieved it from someplace they didn't actually retrieve it from. So that's kind of confusing for students, but that's the rule. Okay, so this is a actual, I had an assignment where students were supposed to evaluate resources for a specific project. And this is the citation I got. The citation is formatted correctly by APA. I knew because of the assignment it was a book, but if I had seen that in a reference list, I would not have known whether that was a book, a website, or something else. That DOI number does not help me as an instructor know how to, and if I were looking at that and the student said, well, this is what I'm using, security planning and disaster recovery, it's from 2002, so it's getting to be almost 10 years old, so it's pretty dated. And then I don't know what kind of resource it is. I don't know who the publisher is. It's McGraw-Hill, and McGraw-Hill I don't consider that scholarly to begin with. So, you know, the student says, the information provided would be a great source to use because of the advancements in technology. Well, advancements 10 years ago? You know, so I would have a hard time giving the student credit based on that citation. I would have to do some more research, and the burden would be on me to figure out who the publisher was and so forth. Question? I had to go and do a search for the book title and figure out who published it. I can't tell from just looking at this, the DOI number, I don't have X-ray vision, so I can't tell that it's McGraw-Hill without them telling me. And APA says you don't have to say who the publisher is, you know, as long as you provide the DOI number. The thinking is that down the road that DOI number will be a unique number and people will be able to just plug that number in and go directly to the source. Yeah, that may be true in 5 years from now, but not right now. It's a lot harder to do it right now. So anyway, so that's one of those little pet peeves I have with the current rules. And I'm bringing this up because when you tell the student to follow APA exactly, then this is some of the things you could run into. And it's just food for thought. Now, another thing that they say to do is if they retrieved it from on some kind of ebook device, and as Leah can attest, the library is starting to get database ebooks that can be downloaded to different kinds of e-readers, then the student technically is supposed to say what version they use too. But you know, they don't always know. And then there's all the social media stuff. Now, I know, you know, most of you guys are graduate faculty, and you say, I want scholarly sources, okay? But what happens if the student is writing a paper on, what is it, his name? Anthony Weiner's tweet. You know, famous tweet, and you're in a psychology class, and that's a primary source, and you want to cite that source. Or you want to cite a YouTube posting that Newt Gingrich just put on, you know, for your history class, and you're giving an example of the kinds of, you know, advertising that, you know, he's using that would be perfectly appropriate to cite in a class assignment. But the APA 6th edition just sort of scratches the surface when it comes to social media. So they have some great information on the blog. So I've been blasting the blog so far about having these convoluted rules, but it's also a great resource for finding things that are harder to know how to cite. For example, here they've got one on, there actually is no example in the APA manual on how to cite a generic website. They had one in the 5th edition. They took it out in the 6th edition. They got so many questions. I think this was actually the reason they started the blog, because they just got bombarded with people asking about that. This is the #1 question that they get when people post to the blog. Is how do I cite a generic website? But they have other things. How to retrieve or how to cite a YouTube video, how to do a Twitter or Facebook posting for group pages and all kinds of other things, a Wikipedia article. you know, and so forth. So they have some, oh, and they have also, recently they just posted this on how to cite a database of video, streaming media, you know, video stuff that is provided in a database. And our library has several databases now that provide streaming media for history and psychology, and PsycInfo is coming out with this Psych Tests. As soon as it's available in a ProQuest format, we're planning to get it, but then students have to know how to cite this stuff if they're going to, you know, use it in their classes, and the blog has that kind of information. And then, do we have anybody in the humanities here? So they've got things on how to cite the U.S. Constitution, recorded music, and the thing is, students, how many times have you said, I want scholarly information, I don't want things just from the web? Students don't understand when they retrieve something that's scholarly that was posted on the web, and when something is just sort of more just generic stuff that gets posted on the web. And the APA blog has this really interesting graphic that I cited correctly that sort of shows that there's some things that are kind of more meaty, you know, that you would expect to see in class citations, but then there's all this other stuff. And the APA rules, they'd have to just sort of figure out, well, I've got a government report, let me go look in the manual and figure out how to take that manual and apply it to a web resource and sort of cobble together a way to cite things. Am I making sense on that? And that's where the librarians can also help, you know, because we're not there to be their editor. We're there to help them figure out what kind of source it is, and so how they can figure out how to match up the web resource that they found. Yeah, they found it on the web, but it could be a government report, could be an association report, could be a conference paper, could be a dissertation, it could be, you know, all kinds of good stuff. And AP has rules for a lot of that kind of stuff in print, but, you know, then we can sort of help them figure out, you know, how to match that up. Does it matter so much for the undergraduates? Maybe not. But by the time they get to doctoral students, they really should be able to, if not figure it out on their own, at least talk to us so that if they're doing it for their dissertation, they have it formatted correctly. I actually did a study, it's been about 5 years ago now, of Fischler dissertations, 144 of them. And one of the things I looked at, for every citation I looked at, I couldn't figure out what it was. I tracked it down, and about a third of them were incorrectly cited. They were appropriate resources, they'd used it, but maybe it was an ERIC document, maybe it was a conference paper. Like I said, they put information down, but they hadn't cited it according to the, you know, as the correct type of resource, because they didn't understand what they were looking at. And that's where the librarians can help. So, you have these nice little handy-dandy bookmarks, and we have this handy-dandy website, library guide. And what that is sort of started out as my own personal shortcut as a dissertation chair to keep track of all these different rules. So, you know, you've got the stuff in the APA manual, you've got the stuff in the blog, they've got a FAQ website, they've got supplemental stuff in the appendix in the book, and I'm like, I can't remember, you know, where they said what. So, for example, let's see if this, yeah, so there's a section on formatting, and I don't know why that is flashing. I didn't do that. But if you go to that tab, and you get the style guides from the different academic centers for Fischler, Farquhar, School of Business, and Psychology, and so forth. So if the student wants to see what special rules each center has, they can look at it. My experience has been, most of the time, the centers don't answer those kinds of questions. Sometimes it's more knowing the informal, you know, because you work in a specific center rather than, you know, getting any consistent guidelines. But if you don't have them, you know, that's maybe something that you guys want to work on in the future. Anyway, just wanted to mention that. There's a tab for citing in text. So it provides information about what they call the author date format, style of citing in text, where the author and the date always stay next to each other, and then you can paraphrase, you can have direct quotes, you can have secondary sources, you can, all that kind of stuff. And then the how do I cite, and if I had my pull-down menu, it's broken down into the categories organized in the APA manual. Let me borrow the manual for a second.
By the way, the answer was personal communication.
Okay, well, let me bookmark that and we'll go back and talk about that more later. I just wanted to point out that in the back of the APA manual, they have things organized with pages where to look for different. I took that and broke it down and provided more details, more examples. So if I needed an example of this kind of citation or that kind of citation, 2 authors, 3 authors for a journal article, I could find it. And I would, every time I could, I would always provide the APA page in the book so I could go back to the primary source. If there was a web link, I'd provide the link to their blog or their style guide or whatever they happen to have. So that's when I'm looking for a specific kind of citation and I want an example. And that's real helpful when I'm in Belize teaching for the Fischler School, or Laura's in Shanghai, or whatever we happen to be, and you don't have the manual with you, you can go back and look at that. Of course, the manual is still your primary source. Okay. But the one we hear about a lot is, I can't find an example. I've got 14 authors, and it's retrieved online in Second Life, and it was a conference paper posted there. And that's an honest-to-goodness example that Laura had to try to figure out how to cite. So they're saying, I've got this, it's scholarly, but I retrieved it in this very bizarre way, and I don't know how to cite it. So what do? APA actually has a blog posting where they talk about what they call Franken references. So a Franken reference, think of Frankenstein. He was cobbled together from different parts. Well, they say you can cobble together citations. You identify the author. Is it 1 author, 2 authors, 3 authors? Is it editor? Is it a corporate author? Is it no author? Is it anonymous? It can be various things. Figure out how that gets cited. Then you figure out the date. Normally the date's pretty straightforward, it's just the year, but sometimes you have the year, comma, month, sometimes year, comma, month, date. Sometimes you have something that was Freud was first published, let's say in 1953, and then republished in 2008 or something. Or what if it's the Bible? How do you cite, put the year for that? So they have examples for the years. So when you have I can't find it, what I actually do is I've got a section that points you to all the blogs, and they're organized alphabetically by posting, so you can look for that. And I've got little videos that will say, okay, you've got an author. Here are all the different ways you can, 1 author, 2 authors. When it gets up to 7 authors, you have the ellipses, ... people want to use et al., but you don't use et al. In the reference list anymore. So all those kinds of discussions. And it walks them through. And the nice thing is, if they're looking at it in a regular computer screen, not a tablet or smartphone format, it's got the table of contents on the side, so they don't have to listen to me drone on and on about every possible variation. They could just see, oh, over here, this is what I want. Corporate authors, what is it? And jump down to just that. And I find, because I did teach in the early 2001, 2002, a course for the literature review for the higher ed students. And I found out that they pretty much picked up the searching and locating information for their literature review pretty well. It was their reference list that drove me crazy, and it sort of is the reason I've gotten so hung up on APA ever since then, because they didn't understand what they were looking at. And I found that students fell into 2 big categories. There are the global thinkers who throw something on the page and it sort of looks right, and to them it looks right. I mean, they really do. And they're just shocked when you sit there and start circling and taking off points for this, that, and the other thing. And then there are those people who are very detail-oriented. And they're sitting there looking at the citation and saying, now, is that comma after the journal title italicized or not italicized? And I've literally had students asking me that. And I don't know the answer. I can't tell it, and I don't see it written down anywhere. But, so some people are very detail-oriented. They don't need the videos over there in the next one, the video tutorials. But the people who are those big global thinkers who don't really see the little details, they need somebody to take them by the hand and say, author, last name, comma, first initial, period. If there are two initials, there's a space between the initials. Put the parentheses around the date, put a period after, literally walking them through step by step. If you don't see that kind of thing, it helps to have somebody, visually talk you through that process. If you don't need it, hey, nothing, no problem. But we do have those videos, and they walk them through a journal citation, a book citation, a web citation, and some other stuff. So that resource is there. Okay. Now, for those of you for undergraduates, we have a more basic one, because the one I'm showing you gives you every esoteric detail I ever ran into that came with citing references and so forth, not so much the body of the paper. But for undergraduates, we have this library guide that has APA basics, and it's just got your books, examples for books, journals, magazines, and so forth. And it's geared for beginners. Doesn't bury them in all the little esoteric details. So instead of the web address that's on the bookmark, if you used the /basics instead, it would, or no, basic APA, it would take you to this site instead of the other one. Okay. We also offer workshops for people who are teaching classes and want to invite a librarian in to do a formal session. You can contact me, you can contact Laura, you can call the reference desk, and they will give you the form. I didn't, yeah, you can, yeah, well, yeah. So Elena can show you the link, but we have an actual form that you go to. Okay, so anytime you see those Ask a Librarian little icons, there's an appointment. And if you want it for your class and you want it as part of the regular class, you can schedule that. If you want us to do an optional one, like a workshop, that the ones who people want, we can schedule one on Sunday or on an evening, and anybody who wants to come can do it. So, you can set it up whichever way is useful for you if you want to, and if you don't, no problem. Okay, so I think that's, so concluding thoughts. So one of the things, when you're telling students to use APA, I would suggest knowing those, basic rules of what you really want or don't want, that you're not picky about, so that they don't obsess over details they don't need to. I think it really is helpful if you let them know, because I can't tell you how many times we get to doctoral students who are at their final dissertation review, and they say, I'm a good APA formatter. My faculty never complained about how I did it. And then I'm sitting there, as the dissertation chair saying, and they're blaming the dissertation chair for being overly anal, and then if you don't, they go to final review and it gets kicked back and said, get an editor, so I don't know how it works in some of the other academic centers, but that's something that you want to think about. And when you're working with the doctoral students, we can help you with some of that, but I think also the academic centers want to think about maybe including, some rules. If you have things that you consistently want used or not used, add it to your style guide. I think it would help the students in the long run. So, now Laura, why don't I give you the headset and you can talk.
Okay, so for the question that came up about posting something in the classroom, the closest I could find was personal communications, because it says maybe private letters, memos, some electronic communications, such as email or messages from non-archived discussion groups and electronic bulletin boards. So I think it would fall under that. It does say a little bit later on here, some forms of personal communication are recoverable, and these should be referenced as archival materials, see section 7.10. And so I went to section 7.10, but if it's inside Blackboard and only your students have access, it's not recoverable for anyone else. So, right, if it's archival, if it's, yeah, if it's, I mean, you're put it in Blackboard, but it's actually available to the world outside of Blackboard, then yeah, cite it as out there. Don't cite it as something inside Blackboard. Any other questions? Were there any questions from, oh, go ahead.
Towards that. So we want to raise that awareness that there are some different formatting styles in sciences and mathematics that need to be accommodated.
Okay, so you're saying APA doesn't address those specific issues in the manual, or you have...
APA has its own formatting guidelines, but some students come from...
Mm-hmm.
and they are used to different types of formatting for...
Well, and that's where the center can specify what, you know, maybe a standard way, or you can say, you know, that you're... I think what you want to do is let the students know that it's okay to use a certain style. The people who are use legal stuff, for example, they actually refer them to the Blue Books codes for legal citations. So when it comes to that discipline, they don't even try to say how to format a Supreme Court decision or a federal law, a bill, or, you know, things like that. They just refer to this other source. So you might be able to point to something specific too.
Students are also taking common courses. So that's the awareness I want to raise.
Mm-hmm.
Is that when students are taking these courses in different domains and they've been told one thing from this center,
yeah, well,
they get really confused.
Hold on one second. Elena, did the people in the distance hear that, or should I repeat it?
Yeah, please repeat it.
The question came up for students in math and engineering and, you know, some of the sciences, that when they're in their specialization courses, they maybe have been taught certain rules for formatting, formulas, and things like that. Then they get to classes in other other classes that are not under the same umbrella, you know, in terms of the same center, so that then there are different expectations for how to format things, and this individual wanted to raise that to let other faculty be aware that, you know, that sometimes happens, and that the student is really trying to follow what they've been told in their discipline. So, yeah. Is it styles generally or styles specifically for formulas?
For citations and references.
Well, Nova doesn't have, so the suggestion was some courses require Turabian or Chicago style or MLA, and a lot of the undergraduate classes do use MLA as opposed to APA. Most of the graduate programs use APA. So this is a problem that the university doesn't have one standard format, and I think it is also true that different disciplines use different formats. So some of that students are always going to struggle with, because they move from one discipline to another. And as an undergraduate, I used Turabian in Chicago, and I had to learn APA when I got to graduate school. So, you know, all I think you can say is if you know the students are going to have problems when they get to certain other classes, is let them know that this is how it's done for your classes, but they're going to have to learn this other style for another class. If it's something that's just specific to formulas that might not be specifically Turabian or Chicago or MLA, then that's something a little bit different, but I don't have any experience with that particular aspect. So, Laura?
By all means. Many of our databases offer citation help in the different styles. Now, I know APA best, and I know that they make mistakes in APA, so I imagine they make mistakes in MLA and Chicago and Turabian, but at least it's some help for the student. So they do a search in a database, and then they choose the ones they like, and then they go to citation, and they can convert it to Turabian or Chicago or MLA. And then they'll have to go to some website to kind of double check and make sure that the capitalization is right, that the authors really are last name, first name, or first name, last name. So unfortunately, that's what we have to tell our students. Even if you know APA really well, and then you go out into your professional life after you're done with your doctorate, and you want to publish in a certain journal, they might have a completely different style from APA. So it's a matter of knowing that whenever you're going to publish something, you will have to follow the style rules of that publication. So it's more of learning the skill that you have to adapt to whatever publication style is required at the moment. I hope that helps.
Can you talk about legacy data too? You know, when they go into the database. Sometimes when the students go into these databases and they use that tool that Laura was talking about, where it formats the citations for them, especially as they get into older citations. When databases were first constructed, there was not the expectation that the information in certain fields would be pulled in to be formatted for citations. You know what I mean? So you may see in the older ProQuest citations where they have first name, last name for an APA citation, which they clearly know is wrong, but back then they had it locked in. They couldn't manipulate it, so it gets turned around and then converted to the first name to an initial. So it's not that they don't know it's wrong, it's they don't, the database isn't, the records back then weren't formatted in a way that allowed them to reconfigure it. Leah, do you want to add anything? So the point being, you know, the students really have to know the rules no matter what and learn how to apply them. Another thing with our tools in the databases, they can run these formatting, and the rule for an article citation is the article title is the first word in the title and the first word in the subtitle is capitalized and the rest of the words are lowercase, right? Well, what if you have, at Nova Southeastern University, students learn, I don't know, about the U.S. Constitution. And everything, you know, Nova Southeastern University is all lowercase because it's not the first word in the title, and U.S. Constitution is all lowercase because it's not the first word in the title. So it doesn't take proper names and make exceptions for the rules. So students need to look at the, you know, their article titles and check to make sure that all the words that are lowercase really should be lowercase. So that's just another one of those stupid little details that is an unintended consequence. They're trying to help the student, but because they apply this rule, they don't know when to look for exceptions. Anyway, so that's pretty much it as far as what I wanted to offer. Any other questions? Well, it's almost 1 o'clock, so you guys have been very patient with a rather picky topic. So, well, thank you very much.